Brian, by the way, I got a bug.
And we are back on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050, WTKA, online at thebig1050.com. I appreciate Sam trying to gut it out. Joined us for a little while, but he is a little under the weather. And as he had said at the end of the last segment, he did not want to be seen on video in his current condition. So he is off. But I am here with the MGoBlog Roundtable. We'll continue obviously the portal conversation, a lot of basketball, as we continue to be joined by Seth Fisher. We welcome in now Brian Cook. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. And Craig Ross. Craig, good morning. How are you?
Looking bad doesn't seem to deter me. Even so,
you do look like a pirate. So for those on the radio, Craig has an eye patch. Those that are watching on video, yes, Craig does in fact look like a pirate. So, all right, let's continue the basketball conversation. We'll get back to the portal part of it, but 6 days ago, obviously, a week ago, you guys were on. We previewed the Sweet 16. The next night, Michigan season came to an end. So figured we'll start with that part of the conversation, just kind of putting a bow on the end of the Michigan basketball season. Dusty May winning the Big Ten postseason tournament, and of course, going to the Sweet 16 in his first year. And then you've quickly turned the page. So, Brian, your kind of your ending thoughts to the season as we very quickly then have to turn the page to the next.
Well, I mean, Sweet 16, and that was after getting rogered pretty heavily by the selection committee. You know, they put up a banner. They exceeded expectations. I think that it's crazy to look at this roster, which had Damari Burnett and Will Cheddar on it, and all of a sudden they're in the Sweet 16. I don't think you can give it anything other than an A.
Yeah, I big picture, I agree. I think preseason, most people had Michigan 9 to 10 in that range in the Big Ten. We were more optimistic. We had them in a bunch of people, someplace between 4 and 7. And they exceeded all of that. And the Auburn game itself was only disappointing because Auburn was terrible for the first 30 minutes and matched Michigan turnover for turnover. And then they sort of pieced it together in the last part of the game. But big picture, was as much it's more than what anyone should have rationally expected. But now, you move on, and next year looks like it's going to look a lot like this year. Who's our team? What does the team look like? And it's going to be, assuming Danny Wolf is gone. And I think that's a rational assumption, at least. They're going to look a lot different.
Yeah, we had a conversation on our podcast last Sunday about, what would Michigan's record be if they stopped the game at 25 minutes or 30 minutes or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, I went and investigated, and one of the things that came out is Michigan was really good in the last 5 minutes. I took out garbage time, and it's still, Michigan in the last 5 minutes of these games always had an answer. And I think that when you look at how many close wins they had, I don't think it was luck. And, early in the season, we were like, oh, God, their luck is terrible because they lost a couple close games. And even when you go and look at those games, they were kind of the other team hitting some tough shots. And Michigan's defense had the right rotations. They had the right contest. They had the ball in the right guy's hand. They got good looks at the ends of games. And I think that's something we might be able to carry forward, that this coaching staff knows how to put together, when you need something, when you need last 5 minutes, you got something. Now it's really hard to put a roster together that's going to compete for a championship now, because every year everyone's going to remake their roster. And Michigan, I'm guessing, going forward is not going to have the same budget as some schools that aren't going to be throwing their NIL budget towards basketball, or towards football. We have other priorities, but we're out there spending. And so you look at where this program was a year ago, where they had just a couple guys on the roster, and they were able to identify the players they need. They were able to identify skills in those players that weren't necessarily on the court. Who saw Danny Wolf being the kind of player he was going to be, right? Dusty May did. That was, they recognized what they could find with that guy. And they, from the very beginning, they're like, let's try this. That was their first attempt, and they ran with it all year, and it worked, and they got more out of these players than they could. And then when you look at a lot of the players that he's gotten before, he knows how to identify talent, right? Like the Sweet 16 was just filled with players who played for Dusty May. So, those are things that you want to look for going forward. Talent identification, knowing how to put together a roster. In an era when you're going to have to re-put your roster together every year is a really good fit. So Michigan is going to be competing for Big Ten championships every year. I don't know if they're going to be national championship contenders because I think the top players are probably going to coalesce at a few schools. But they're going to have a chance, and we're going to get to the Final Four, and it's going to feel like Beeline again. And I'm really excited about that. I think Dusty May was a fantastic hire, and I think that these players really wanted to play for him, even though it's kind of sucks now that not all of them can.
Yeah, the bar in the first year was set at a pretty nice level, right? You're competing to raise banners every year. You're going to the Sweet 16 as kind of a starting point. So it was a great starting point. But the conversation, it's amazing how quickly things transition. Like even during the run, obviously Pippen hits the portal, and then Jace Howard obviously hits the portal. Sam Walters. The biggest one was Trey Donaldson hitting the portal as Michigan brings in Cadeau. They bring in Morris Johnson. So they have a couple guys coming in, probably more on their way in. I almost can't I left my house the other day to go pick up Grace from school. My house and the school are less than 5 minutes apart. And by the time I got to school, I'm getting text messages. What's going on with Trey? Like, I can't leave my house for 5 minutes without feeling like news is going to break. And maybe today's the next day that we have another case of this. I know you and Sam, Seth, you and Sam were talking about how unsustainable this is. And it's just so fast and furious that it can't be sustainable because it's not just about the roster turnover, but just how tomorrow another guy's going to enter the portal and we kind of wanted him instead of this other. How do you keep on top of it and build a roster if we're not even sure who's available yet?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess the answer to that depends to some extent on how fans deal with it. As long as fans show up to the games, as long as they're still interested, I guess it's sustainable. But at the point in time where fans decide, I can't deal with this. This isn't interesting to me. I don't like it. I'm not paying for tickets. I'm turning the TV off. At that point, then it becomes not sustainable. So I guess to some extent, it's on all of us in terms of, what the NCAA can do or what forces external to the NCAA can do. It only becomes sane when you have a collective bargaining agreement. When you have a collective bargaining agreement, but that means you have to have someone to bargain with. And as of this moment, there's no one to bargain with as far as I can tell. And I don't see that as a year or two away. So my vision is that what we're seeing now is what we're going to continue to see, at least in the midterm for the next few years. I don't think it's like in 2026, this is changing.
So in that world, since we're in that world, Brian, looking at what's in right now, what we think is still coming back, how would you fill out the remainder for a well-structured roster? Like kind of looking at the minutes and the depth chart. I mean, that's kind of where obviously that's what Dusty's in the middle of the process of doing. Cadeau's the point guard, Johnson's the big, we got a couple other guys returning. How are you looking at this roster as it's starting to fill out and looking like a well-structured roster?
Well, you need another center, or at least a guy who can play there for 10 to 15 minutes a game. And Yaxel Lindeborg out of UAB looks like he can be that kind of 4 or 5 tweener, 23 assist rate, inside outside shooter, probably the closest equivalent to Danny Wolf in this year's portal. If you get him, I think you could be done. I mean, you have your 2 guys at the 5. You have a couple backups at the 4 who could moonlight at the 5 if absolutely necessary, and Cheddar and Goodman. And then between, Cadeau, Kaysen, McKinney, Gale, Winters, Grady, Fat, feels like you have enough guys on the perimeter. The one thing that you might want to add is a guy like Sam Walters, just a bench shooter who can come off the bench and shoot 40% from 3 and not have to do a whole lot else. But in terms of a team, you looked at this team before Cadeau swapped with Donaldson basically, and I was like, I don't think they have any minutes for guards because the only minutes that are coming open other than, the Donaldson-Cadeau swap or 20 minutes from Reuben Jones. And I think you got to give all of those to McKinney and Kaysen.
Well, a couple things on that. One is it isn't. I mean, one, you didn't mention Namari, and for my money in the Auburn game, Namari might have been our best player. I did finally watch that game. I hadn't on Sunday, but I did last night watch that game in slow-mo. Namari played really well. He did a lot of the small things you want your guys to do on the court. Didn't make a lot of mistakes. He played a very fine game. Now, I assume Namari is back next year. Maybe he isn't. He hasn't announced. We know Roddy is back. He said he's coming back. I don't know what Namari is doing. But I think he's got to be in your equation next year. He's probably your best spot up shooter. Yeah, he's not a jump shooter. He's a set shooter. He's slow to release the ball, but give him an open shot, he's making it, or there's a good chance he's making it. And he does a lot of other things really pretty well, aside from at this point understanding what Dusty May expects of him. If they get Yaxel, if that would happen, then I pretty much agree with Brian. They don't really need anything else. Now, what McKinney's going to be, it isn't so clear to me. He's still a freshman. We all had these same thoughts about Caleb Houston and Diabate. And while those are players who still may be evolving. And it isn't clear to me that McKinney's just going to step up and be ready to roll. He did not, for example, play particularly well in the McDonald's All-Star game. He wasn't terrible, but he didn't play particularly well either.
I mean, you can't put any stock in it.
I'm not putting any stock into
watching the NBA All-Star game.
I know.
And trying to draw conclusions
I'm not drawing much of a conclusion except to say, A, he's a freshman, and B, he ain't Chris Webber. You could predict that Chris Webber would step on the court and be Chris Webber in day one, and he was. McKinney is an incredibly good prospect, but it's not clear to me he steps into the Michigan program, eats up 30 minutes, and is an all-star. I mean, that's.
But does he have to be that in year one?
Oh, he doesn't know.
No,
he does not.
Roster 20.
He does not, and part of the reason for that is they got other good guys hanging around. Namari, for example.
Yeah, they got Namari, they got Gale, they got Kaysen. There's a lot of guys who are going to be helping him.
So I agree with the big picture thought that if they get Yaxel, okay, you got a team and you can begin to sort of envision what it looks like. But I don't think that you automatically carve out 30 minutes for McKinney and say, okay, that's it.
Are we that sure they're going to get Yaxel? Because I mean, Kentucky.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, we're going against one of those schools that has plenty of money to throw at him.
It's Kentucky, right?
I'm sure we just used a bunch of money to get Williams, right? Like he was a top guy in the portal as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Johnson, not Williams.
Yeah,
Montez Johnson, yeah, who I like, by the way. I remember watching his film and I'm going, oh, I'm glad he's not playing against us. He broke his wrist by going up so high to block a shot. He fell over Trey Holloman for Michigan State. It was an incredible play. And then you could see how hurt he got. But man, he's got some bounce. He's going to be a dunker. I think that they've got Winters Grady, I think, is someone who can probably take a couple minutes next year as far as your wing. But that's, as Brian mentioned, you always want to have like that, that 6'6" guy who can get his own shot off. And Namari doesn't necessarily get his own shot off, but he did show late in the season, very late in the season, probably just one game in the Big Ten tournament and then in the NCAAs, that he can create a little bit more, right? He wasn't putting the ball on the floor at all for most of the season, and then by the end of the Auburn game, like he was a creator, right? Or at least he was getting into the lane and making his own shots a few times, which he doesn't need to do a lot of that. Right. But if he can be a tertiary creator instead of your fourth guy, Namari is, and that might be the step that he takes next year. Right. If he comes back and he has that next year. But, I always want to have that, that 6'6" guy who can just get his own shot off, because sometimes there's just no other. You want to have a floor for your possessions. and Michigan's floor for their possessions was coughing it up and giving a run out on the other direction. And if you have somebody you can, just swing it around to and have him shoot it, then you could cut down on like a lot of the issues that they had on offense this year.
I mean, I guess my question is, if they don't get Yaxel, and I suspect this is a coin flip at best for Michigan, if they don't, then what does this team begin to look like? And
I don't think he's the last big option in the field that can shoot, which is what they obviously would be looking for. He's just the top of the options.
Yeah, well, I don't know what else. What the other alternatives are right now. There are some guys out there, but Montez is 2 feet from the basket guy. Now, I mean, in my vision, what I see is Montez being what Michigan didn't have this year. Just a kick-ass rebounder. I mean, a kick-ass rebounder and super tough guy around the basket. He didn't shoot a 3 all year, rarely shoots the ball except when it's a dunk or from, a foot or two away. And so, yeah, he's a tough guy. He's good. He's something that Michigan can use. If you put another similar sort of player behind him, or with him, your team looks a lot different than it does with Danny Wolf, who I assume is gone, or Lendenberg, who knows. So right now, as your wife says, Ira, it's just hard to see through the mist. Wake me when it's over. I mean,
she's just checked out. Wake me when there's a full roster.
Right.
I mean, Morris Johnson brings a fair amount of physicality that that they obviously need. And you mentioned the rebounding part. Like we need more rebounding. Dusty said we need more rebounding. He went a physical guy. He went out and got a guy that's gone through it in the Big Ten first year, very physical guy. And I think that the only thing that I'd be looking for, who isn't always looking for an extra shooter? Right. Everybody wants an extra shooter. And I think you guys had mentioned, the loss of Walters, just having a guy like that, not necessarily 6'10", but a guy like that off the bench that could just shoot if you need someone to come in and make shots, because they did kind of feel like they lacked that late in the season. Although Will Cheddar is a little bit of that, but I feel like they could use one more.
I mean, you might need 2 more guys in the front court, because Morez is probably going to be on the court 50% of the minute. Like, he gets a lot of fouls, and he brought it down. He was just a freshman last year, so that's going to come down some. But I mean, his style of game is, he plays rough, and that he's not going to be able to stay in the game, period. Plus, he's 6'9", and he can get up, and he's physical, but he's 6'9", and you're going to face some teams that are going to have some 7'1" guys. So, you're going to want to have another true center that you can play or even start, right? And then you're going to want to have someone at the 4 who can shoot and create and have some size. Because if you're going to use, Burnett at the 4 or something like that, you're going to get really small. If you're going to play Cheddar at the 4, you're going to get exposed a little bit to teams with wings. I don't know if Oscar Goodman is going to be ready to play next year, but he's an international guy. I know he's been here, he's been practicing, but I might be a little too soon for him. So I think you probably need, a big wing or a real 4 in addition to, a center.
Well, yeah, to me, it just depends on what happens with Lendenberg, and you go from there. There are other big guys out there, but I don't think, got the guy yesterday or the day before, the guy from UCLA, 7'2" guy, a day something, but that one, who knows? At this point, I think Michigan's got a lot of chips in, as far as I can tell, in the Lendenberg basket. So,
what about around as we obviously continue to watch Dusty build the roster? What about the other movements around the Big Ten? Coaching changes. There's been a little bit of upheaval. Obviously, Kevin Willard's selfish, not the way he acted was selfish.
Maryland fan much there?
I don't. But Van Pelt nailed it. You don't poop on the place that you just were, but that's besides the point. So Maryland goes out and gets Buzz Williams, who obviously just got knocked out of the tournament by Michigan. I'm not sure it's really an upgrade for Maryland, but there's been Indiana's got a new coach, Minnesota's got a new coach, now Maryland's got a new coach. the word is that since Chris Beard's staying at Mississippi, that A&M may be looking at Brad Underwood. So maybe that would be an interesting one to follow. Now that the coaching carousel is almost settled down in the Big Ten. Seth, your thoughts?
I don't know. That A&M job, I remember going over articles of A&M looking for coaches. They shoot the moon, and then people look at that situation and go, not sure I want to do that. I thought they had a fantastic coach in Buzz Williams for a while, and that's a big loss for them. But A&M thinks that they're a top program, top destination, and anyone who looks at that is like, nah, I don't really want to be in College Station. So I don't know if they're going to be able to get Brett Underwood to leave Illinois, which does have a real basketball history there and does support him really well. Like Illinois has had, how many times have we lost battles to Illinois for guys, for over NIL reasons? If he wants to get a guy in academically, they're willing to work with him and everything. Like Illinois is not a bad spot at all. And I'm not sure Underwood's going to want to trade down to A&M, even if the SEC, looks really strong right now. The situation in Maryland, you're closer to than I am, but from my view, they didn't have an athletic director.
They don't. He just left for SMU.
Right. So Willard is sitting there like, hey,
athletic departments on Wikipedia. Maryland is the case in example right now. It is totally dysfunctional.
Yeah. So Willard is sitting there going, hey man, I got to recruit my roster, right? Like it's time. Like the portal is opening. I got to put my team together, and I can't get a straight answer of how much NIL do I have, right? Who's going to be backing me? He can't get any answers. So I think at that point, that's when he started looking around, and he started. You could see it in his press conferences. It's like, hey, yes, we're in the season right now, but the off season we don't have any time. The off season starts when I'm still playing, and that I have to be putting my roster together right now, and nobody's backing me, no one's behind me, and that's I think why he wanted out of there. Mm-hmm. And I think they really lucked out in getting Buzz because he's a fantastic coach. I was. When I was previewing A&M, I'm just like, this is a really well coached team. So, I think Maryland's going to be fine.
Yeah, I've said before on the show several times that I like Buzz Williams a lot. I think he's a really good coach. I think Maryland may have a step up in coaching there with Buzz, and my guess is he might bring Farrell Payne with him, which won't hurt. So I don't know about the interstices of the Maryland athletic department or their program, but at least in the limited sense of Buzz Williams and who he may bring with him, I think that's a gold mine for Maryland.
Yeah, and I think 5 or 6 years, and then he'll leave for his next job.
Then right, because he never seems to stay anywhere for more than 5 or 6 years.
How is anybody still playing for Mick Cronin? Like, you guys can get out now. You're free. Run, flee, fly.
That is one of the most remarkable stories of the basketball season. That they went from what he was saying in the to the media in like January, and they rallied to finish 4th in the Big Ten. He threw his coaches, his players, his fans, like the trout. He literally threw everybody under the bus at some point in time, and somehow they rallied to finish 4th in the Big Ten. And then
before that, he threw Tyler Bilodeau to the whims of Vlad Golden. Right? Like I wouldn't want to play for a guy who does that to me and then yells at, you got beat up by that guy. Well, you're 6'9", 225. What do you want from me?
Yeah, I wouldn't play for Mick. But I kind of think that Buzz Williams is a kind of like Mick Cronin. I think that they're kind of two peas in a pod. So I'm waiting to see and be proven wrong. As a Maryland guy who was not totally sold on Buzz Williams, I see a guy that runs out of a job before things catch up to him, and it's happened at Marquette. It happens. Virginia Tech to Texas A&M is a step up, but we'll see. I'm not sold on Buzz yet. I have to be sold on Buzz. We'll see how it goes. But that's the coaching carousel in the Big Ten. It's going to look a lot different. I forgot to mention Iowa's got a new coach. There's going to be a lot of new fresh faces coaching around the league.
I didn't pay attention. Who did Iowa hire?
They hired McCallum.
Drake guy.
Yeah, the guy from Drake. Indiana hired DeVries, who came from West Virginia. Yeah. I like to hire the Minnesota mate. I think that the guy from Colorado State, I think that he's Nico Medved's. He's one of those guys that runs a lot of stuff. They make a lot of beeline comparisons to him.
I know he was definitely high on our list of of coaches we were talking about. It's funny when you look at like where everyone ended up in this generation after this roller coaster. If you would have predicted, where's Nico Medved going to be, and where, I think Michigan would have gotten Nico. I think that everyone kind of figured Dusty May was going to go to Indiana, like Ohio State. Everyone really kind of surprised everybody by getting who they. Everyone kind of ended up in not the spot you thought they would have gotten, right? And you figured Iowa would just, kept going. Who thought Iowa was going to be involved in this, or get the guy from, it's kind of weird. I think we have at the top of the cycle. Like I like Nico Medved and I like Dusty May when we were looking at options last year, and I think May is now past Medved, and I have a lot of respect for Medved. I think he's a fantastic coach, but
the thing about these hires that kind of jumps out is that none of them are obviously stupid, which we haven't had to say about. We haven't been able to say that about Big Ten coaching hires in a minute, because just last year, Chris Holtmann was replaced by Chris Holtmann's assistant, and Mike Woodson, a longtime NBA assistant who's nearly 70. That was an obviously bad hire. Like there have been previous decisions in this league that are just kind of flabbergasting. And, at least this time around, Nico Medved makes sense for Minnesota. DeVries makes sense for Indiana. McCollum makes sense for Iowa. Like, that's better than it usually is. And I'm just hoping that Michigan can schedule Penn this time around, because I'm going to miss Fran. All offense, no defense, and he was so fun.
Yeah.
He's going to Penn?
He took the Penn job. So but he wasn't even gone from Iowa yet. And I was talking to Steve Clark about that, because Fran went to Penn. He's a Penn guy. Penn had fired their coach. And I thought that Fran just on his own should say, you know what, I'm kind of done at Iowa. And because it's a very soft landing, go to your alma mater. I agree with you, Brian, but a home and home would be fine. Getting Fran to Christ would be great. But going back to the Palestra, it's a historic venue. It'd be a great place to go play a game. And I'd love to play Fran again, because there's something about his theatrics. Although we are welcoming Buzz Williams to the league, so you're going to get some of those theatrics in the league anyway. But yeah, it's not quite at Fran McCaffrey levels. He's at his own. He's top notch.
I love, but Buzz gets bad press. But Buzz gets bad press like Jim Harbaugh got bad press. He's that kind of character. He's just a super ridiculously intense basketball coach. I think you're gonna love him, man.
I hope so. I hope he wins there. Not to the point necessarily that he. We'll see. We'll see. We still have more of the MGoBlog Roundtable to get to on the other side of the break here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTKA, online at thebig1050.com. And we are clear. So, Craig, do you want to go through this list? We can go through the Craig Ross dissertation of college basketball officials.
Well, I don't know.
How many of these do you think actually believe they should be there? Roger Ayers may be the only one that's a good official.
Roger Ayers is a good official.
I assume everybody saw what he did in the Liberty game when he stopped 30 seconds or whatever to go. He claimed he saw a wet spot on the floor. There was a kid from Liberty that was trying to check in just to get, on the box score, a walk on the, whatever it is, end of the bench guy. And so he looked down on the floor. He made it look like there was a wet spot. He blew a whistle, said, just wet spot. And he just got the kid in the game. And then
I didn't see that.
But it was pretty cool.
It's hard to argue with Roger Ayers. He has a long history of being a good official.
All right. See, if you may not know all these names, but James, they're alphabetical, not in any other order. James Breeding, do you know where he's from?
Yeah, I've seen him in the Big Ten. He has done Michigan games in the past, not this year. He's okay, mediocre, not a terrible ref, not a great ref, my opinion. But I haven't seen him in the last year. Refs do evolve, just like players and everybody else.
Some do. AJ Desai, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Yeah. Courtney Green.
Courtney Green has never been my favorite ref. Thought he's given Michigan some terrible games. We didn't see him this year, I don't think, or the last year. But we've had some games with him and was never impressed.
No, I saw him call a game. I can't remember which game it was in the Sweet 16 of the Elite Eight. He was terrible. Ronald Groover.
Yeah, he's good. We've had him a couple times. He's mostly, I think, been in the ACC. I'm surprised I know these guys.
Michael Irving.
Michael who?
Irving, not Michael Irvin, the receiver, Michael Irving.
Oh no, Michael Irving.
Keith Kimball.
Yeah, I hate Kimball. Although I thought that he got better this year. He's a ref that's, we had like a 2-11 record with him over some period of time. I thought he had his thumb on the scale. But the last year or so, I'm warming a bit to him. I thought that I've seen him in a couple of games where I said, all right, that was okay. So
Terry Oglesby,
my favorite ref. He's been a Big Ten ref for a long time. I feel like he's called very few weak games when we've seen him in Michigan. I'm always happy to see Terry Oglesby. I'd never think he has his thumb on the scale. I think he really tries to call a fair game.
Tony Padilla.
I know who he is. I've seen him. I don't have an opinion.
All right, there's two more. Doug Shows.
Don't know him.
Doug Sermons.
Don't know him either.
I've recognized his name, but Cordy Green's the one that stands out to me because he is a terrible official. The fact that he was, I was at the Big Ten championship game, actually for that matter, the women's game and the men's game, and I've seen all these officials all year. And you look at the floor and you go, these are the three best in the league.
Yeah, I know.
And that's generally what happens. But hopefully we'll get the best of these in these final final three games on the in the bracket before we.
So Sells didn't make it.
No. No, Paul Sells did not make it.
Stunning.
No, and what's DJ Carsonson, and like that's I would honestly when the list gets posted
Carsonson is great as long as he's refereeing bigs. He doesn't keep him away from the guards, but he is the best. He was a big himself, so he knows what verticality is, and nobody else in the league seems to know that.
I like him in road games because he sort of gets off on being antagonistic to home coaches and crowds. I'm not sure I like him so much at home, but if I see him on a road game, I'm usually happy.
All right, I knew you'd have a response.
I have opinions
in about 10 seconds. Stand by, guys.
Brian, I think your mic is on your computer right now.
Mine?
Yeah, I had to order a new one.
Okay.
And we are back here on the Michigan Insider, the Big 1050 WTKA, online at thebig1050.com. Sam was in and out today. He is under the weather. He gutted through an hour or so, but he has now gone back, hopefully to bed, to recover. In the meantime, I have a little more time with my guys from the MGoBlog Roundtable. Brian Cook, Seth Fisher, Craig Ross are here with me. And guys, let's get in a little football. How about that? A little football. Spring ball is well underway now. We're getting a lot of comments from players and coaches, and maybe getting a little bit coming from, I think all everybody really wants to see is just videos of Bryce throwing footballs to whoever. They don't really care who. But the comment that stood out to me the most of all the comments that I've heard, and it's just because of a funny comment, Seth, and you and I were briefly talking about this earlier off the air. But yesterday we had media avails with three players, Donovan McCulley, Fred Moore, and Gio El-Hadi. And actually got some real information out of those guys, like Gio talking about moving to the left guard spot, which we'll get into a little bit of that in a minute. But Donovan McCulley was asked for his most vivid memories. What does he remember about playing in the Big House when he was on Indiana? He was the quarterback. And his response was Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo, which seems to make sense if you're a visiting quarterback around that time.
I could have guessed that. He's being a little unfair to Michael Barrett because that was that silly game they put at night. We had a beautiful November day, and then for some reason we're playing Indiana at night. So it was freezing cold. Indiana was terrible. Obviously, they were down in Donovan McCulley, true freshman, trying to play quarterback. So they just ran him. They weren't going to bother throwing downfield at all. Michigan responded by going to a 4-3, which they didn't do very much that year, with Barrett at Sam, and basically turned him into Khaleke Hudson. And because they could do that, they could leave Ojabo out there all game because Ojabo is like the 4-3 defensive end. And that was that was the moment getting me banging the table. Like every time we face a quarterback who can run, this is what we should be doing, because that was like the first Barrett game. That was the first time like he really popped. And he almost had a couple interceptions in that game. He was coming off the edge, and because they had to pay attention to him, they were singling Ojabo or singling Hutchinson, depending on which side he was coming off of. And it was, I mean, you can't take away anything from the Indiana game, but I remember Barrett in that game particularly.
All right, so McCulley comes in, guys, and he's going to help bolster the size Brian, in the wide receiver room. I think he immediately made the wide receiver room a lot taller because everybody else is like 3 or 4 inches shorter than he is. But he comes in, and it sounds like he's one of the favorites to be one of the big receivers on the field. As they revamp that room and they reshape the offense, are you here? Like, what do you, as the players make little comments, little whispers here and there? Your thoughts on the wide receiver room as we're inching through, we're about halfway through spring ball at this point, right about the halfway point.
I mean, McCulley is a guy who was Indiana's best receiver 2 years ago and then got hurt, new coach, all that stuff. Really high contested catch rate, and that's something that I think is helpful with a freshman quarterback because he's going to put it up for grabs from time to time. That's just how freshmen do. So I think he's a very valuable guy in the room. And then you're looking at, tight ends, like I think are going to be also very important because another thing you do with freshman quarterbacks is you keep it simple and close to the line of scrimmage. So I think that, those like Hogan Hansen had a good freshman year. He's going to need to step up in the absence of Colston Loveland. And then it's just about finding some other guys to give you just a little bit of something. Like they didn't get another guy in the portal, which I thought was like it should have been a real priority. So that room is probably still going to be a little weak this year, and it'll be up to Michigan to work around it.
A side note, because you mentioned the portal, are there receivers? Like I know that they're talking about maybe trying to keep looking at the portal. There's going to be a spring window. I'm not even sure what would be available at this point.
They're looking at Sincere Brown, who played for the Campbell University Fighting Camels, coached by Mike Minter, not related to the other Minters. I had to learn about Campbell because I was looking at him. And another 6'5" guy. He's a stick. He's 6'5", 210 or something like that. But he had 1,000 yards last year. And they're talking every time you ask anybody about Michigan's receivers next year, everyone's just saying, "Oh, McCulley. McCulley's going to get 1,000 yards. McCulley's going to be," which telling me, God, poor Fred Moore. Like, he needs to take a step up. He had a really good. A really good bowl game, and they're not talking about him at all. Andrew Marsh, they kind of talked about him being really fast, and he's got a lot longer limbs, so he may have come in smaller, but he might factor in. So you're talking about new guys coming in. They're also mentioning Jamar Browder as a name to watch, another big player and another new player. There's no talk of a Morian Walker. CJ Charleston is back, but I think he might still be injured. So I think that they're kind of moving on from the speed and space and shifting very hard back in the direction of contested ballers. And one guy that they brought back, who I don't think anyone's been mentioning, is Eric Campbell, who was the wide receiver coach under Lloyd Carr. Campbell, Ty Streets, Diallo Johnson, Marcus Knight, David Terrell, Marquise Walker, Braylon Edwards, Avant, right? And Mario Manningham. All those guys were recruited by and played for Eric Campbell. He knows how to coach big receivers. He knows how to, and it's, like Brian said, you have a quarterback who's a freshman. He's going to have to put it up a little bit, and they're going to have to, just lob balls down the sideline a little bit and expect the receivers to make plays. So I think that's, you're not going to see a passing offense as complicated as we've been running the last few years because you have a freshman quarterback, and now you're locked in because Mikey Keene's apparently injured. No one says what the injury is, but you're locked in. It's Bryce. Right, we're doing this, and you need to protect Bryce. You need to give him options to get rid of the ball quickly. And we've seen Michigan State do this. We've seen other schools do this. Sometimes the way to deal with the fact that you don't have a great offensive line, and that's another thing that I'm kind of worried about this year. And you have a quarterback who's not going to know how to make all the reads and hang in there and work things. Well, you don't have receivers who are getting open on their own. Well, throw it to the guy who's not open, right? Chad Henne to Braylon Edwards. Let's go.
Yeah, as I've said before, I'm less concerned. I mean, I think Fred is a good wide receiver. We'll show it this year. I think he may be our best wide receiver this year. McCulley helps. I think they have enough in the room, absent injuries, of course. I think they have enough in the room to be okay there. And I was listening to Connor Stallion's interview this week, which I've commend to people. I know people don't want to hear, a lot of people don't want to hear that name, but he's a fascinating guy. And he was talking about Michigan this year, and he's pretty well convinced that the defense will not take much of a step back, and if any. And I came away with the thought that, what's going to make or break this coming year is just going to be, what does the offensive line look like? Can they've got running backs, I believe. Can they put together a viable running game? And will that lessen some pressure on the pass game? I think almost regardless of who plays at the quarterback position, it's going to be better than last year.
So that's a great transition, because I was gonna transition over, because the three guys we heard from yesterday were Fred Moore, Donovan McCauley, and then we heard from Gio Alhadi. So wide receiver and offensive line, which coincidentally both positions have a lot of support staff. I think there's like 3 or 4 guys coaching receivers. Jack Tuttle's now, assistant receivers coach. To go, you mentioned obviously with Soup Campbell coming back. Offensive line's got like 3 or 4 guys that are helping coach the line this year. They've talked about Juan Castillo, for example, as one of those guys coming in to help out. So they've got a lot of help as far as coaching those guys up. Gio talked about switching back. He's going over to the left side. He's more comfortable at left guard. There's a decent amount of experience. Obviously going to be plugging in some new guys as well. How does the offensive line shape up at this stage?
They're talking about Evan Link at left tackle. And, they're pushing him up right now. And Lorenz said something on his on a little private talk with subscribers. I think he does not mind me sharing it on the radio. Is that there's a reason why Michigan stuck with Link last year. So that's got to be coming from the coaches. I think Sharon Moore, adores that guy, and I hope they're right. They say he's a lot more comfortable on the left. So, if you're going to move what your right side was last year, right side was kind of the weaker side of the line last year. Now that's going to be your left side. Maybe they're more comfortable there. Maybe it works. I haven't really heard that much about Sprague. They're talking about a lot of interior guys. Talking about Nathan Efobe. I screw this name up all the time. Efobe.
Yeah, Efobe.
You're talking about Nathan Efobe stepping up. But I think Hattar is going to be in. He's going to be here in fall, so that job is probably not going to be taken yet. I think the offensive line is probably not going to be a great strength this year. They're talking like it's going to be, but we've seen 5th-year centers really step up. So they might get something out of that. We have experience. Al-Hadi is we've seen Al-Hadi be a good player. Maybe they got something in Link. Sprague could take a step forward. There are routes to being a pretty good running offensive line. I don't see them being a good pass pro line. I saw nothing from Link last year that made me think he's going to be a great blindside tackle. Hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. What about Andrew Babalola starting as a true freshman?
Hey, I mean, they're already, as soon as they got asked about him, you saw Newsom's press conference. As soon as he was asked about him, he's like, yeah, he's got some things to learn, which is what we were saying when we got this guy. I'm like, okay, looks like Miles Hinton knows as much as Miles Hinton about football when Hinton was just starting out. So he's going to take a year. Now, next year, he might come in, right? But it's going to be, I don't think you're going to see Babalola starting this year. I think that they kind of want to go with a run-first offense, that they're going to, mash you down. They're going to have 2 running backs, both of them who are going to be, pretty good at running between the tackles. And it's not going to be a top 50 offense. Maybe not going to be top 30 offense, but maybe a top 50 offense. They're going to have some players. They're going to have some big plays, but it's really going to be a defensive team. And I think that, I can't always say, hey, you listen to Connor Stallions, but I do agree that Michigan's defense is going to be really good. I think that they have a lot of depth at defensive tackle. I think Benny is demonstrated he's a real player. I think he's going to step up and be a real force. And I really like Lou Esposito. I was a fan of his when he was coaching at Western Michigan in 2018. I was watching his defensive linemen and being like, these guys are well coached. And then 2021, they broke Michigan's system that they've been using to beat everybody that year. They knew how to defeat it. They figured it out. So and then his press conference, he was talking about things that you usually don't hear coaches talk about. He goes, listen, I can coach these guys up as well as you want me to, but it's really, this game's a big man beats small man game. And that's what we have, is we got some big guys who are not going to be moved. And these guys play hard. They know their assignments. It's really a hard position, and these guys have a lot of experience, and that's what you needed for a good defensive line. No, we're not going to be as explosive as our 2 guys last year, but please don't count these guys out. We're going to have, with depth, we're going to be able to make up some of this. And then the edges are going to be able to play a little bit more, because the edges, this is true. Last year, there were a lot of times when Derek Moore could have gotten a sack, but Mason Graham was already eating the guy. So there's going to be a little bit more play from Derek Moore. I think Guy is really going to step up and be a star this year. So and they've got some dudes behind them who have played and they look pretty good. I think they've got a great defensive line, and that's where it starts. They got 2 great linebackers. I think that's, that's what you need to be up front. And they added a lot of guys in the secondary. I think people are sleeping on Mangum, and we're starting to hear some things about him already from spring practice. So
you're a big Mangum guy, is what you're saying?
Listen, aside from the Groves thing, right? I need to make this clear now, because now we're getting into analysis. That's a bit. All right. I barely went to Groves games, and I kind of rooted for Seaholm because my brother was playing for Seaholm when I was in high school. All right. I'm excited that my school has guys on this roster now. I am. But Mangum, I liked him at Michigan State. I thought that he wasn't the problem at Michigan State's defense, even when he was a freshman out there playing cover 3. And I think he's a smart player. He's had a year now to pick up the defense. He was injured last year, so it wasn't like he wasn't playing because he couldn't play. And they're already talking about him right now as one of the guys they expect to start at safety when they have a lot of safeties available. So,
including Rod Moore, right?
Well, that's the downside.
Is that a question?
Rod Moore's not practicing right now.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened with his injury. I don't know if they're trying to hold back how bad it was, or if maybe they're just trying to be careful with him and make sure they don't injure him. And but I think that Rod Moore, because the nickel spot, they're kind of talking about lots of different guys there. That makes to me sounds like they expect Rod Moore to play and fall and be the nickel. But I'm a little worried now, where I wasn't before, that he might not be able to come back from his injury.
Yeah, well, the thing that impresses me most about the spring is how little information there's been. I mean, almost always there's, more than this. From my point of view, this has been about the quietest spring ever. And so I suspect people are looking forward to April 19th and seeing what they can see for themselves.
Basketball was going on, so that people were focusing on that. If you go to any of the pay sides right now, it's 9-10 articles about recruits, and that's interesting. A lot of schools are really hiding their spring practices right now. They're not having spring games, and coaches are really worried about players who perform well in spring when other guys are out or something like that leaving, because now their name gets out there and people get film on them. And it sounds insane, but coaches are insane, right? They're going to go and look and see Ben Hall have like a great performance in spring and be like, oh, he's a third back at Michigan, why don't you come play here? And Michigan is using their spring as a recruiting tool. They have a lot of guys on campus right now, a lot of big name guys, like the top overall prospect in 2026. And that's why we're getting all these recruiting articles. And look, these are big, fairly big staff, especially compared to us. But that's what they're covering right now. When all these big names, when the number one recruit in the country is visiting Michigan, that's what the people are focusing on who are going to be writing these articles. So I don't think that it's the program itself trying to keep things quiet, maybe to a small degree, just so they don't get guys poached. But I'm still getting like those people who there's donors that they give information to, and those donors, pass it around. I'm still getting some of those emails. I'm still getting some things, and it doesn't feel that different from Harbaugh, who was kind of stingy with information too. But like the things they want us to hear, we're hearing, and I'm starting to be able to use that to piece some information together. So it's not nothing. It's just not. It's not on the top of 247 page right now because, like, hey, this recruit.
Everything is recruiting, and these guys have all been, when they come on an unofficial visit, they then come into this building and they're down in our TV studio down the hall, and I'm not here for all of them. Sam obviously is. And then I hear from the other people that are in the building, like, man, this kid was here yesterday. He was huge. And then Sam tells me it was like some 6'4", 330-pound offensive line recruit or whatever. You're like, they've been coming through here in droves, and because they've been having all these unofficial visitors, and it's not done because they still have another couple of weeks of spring ball. Spring game, of course, is not on TV live. It'll be tape delay for 8 days later. You can watch it live in the stadium on Saturday, April 19th at noon at Michigan Stadium. You can listen to the game live right here on the Big 1050 WTKA. kind of silly to not be live on TV, but here we are. So, guys, we'll have 2 more editions of the roundtable before the spring game. Any final thoughts before we wrap up, Seth?
No, man. I talked a lot. Let the other guys chat.
Just want to say, as unsettled as basketball is at the moment, hockey is worse. So, and maybe that's something we'll talk about as we go along.
Parting shot, Brian?
Nope.
We'll see you guys next week. This has been the MGoBlog Roundtable, and this has been the Michigan Insider